Okay, I think we are then therefore ready to go. Okay,
Okey-dokey.
so here we go. 3, 2, 1. Joining us from the NPR studios in New York City is Milo Yiannopoulos, a British-born media personality, former senior editor at Breitbart, and author of the new book, Dangerous. So, Milo, first of all, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
And obviously this is NPR. NPR has a certain kind of reputation. You have a certain kind of reputation. There,
They don't sound like they go together, do they?
no, I would say the Venn diagram doesn't really overlap all that much.
You'd be
And so-
surprised. You'd be surprised.
Yeah,
I might be
tell me
slumming it
about
on
that.
public radio today, but there are plenty of NPR listeners who are just as upset with the things that I talk about in the book as the conventional Milo audience. So no, I think there's a little Venn diagram bigger than people realize, and it's bigger than
Right.
the media realizes. As we saw in the last election, they're very bad at predicting what America cares about.
Right. So that's a great way of answering or beginning to answer what was going to be my next question. I mean, I am going to have listeners because people have in their minds an idea of who you are and what you are. I am going to have listeners who are going to say, why are you putting this guy on the radio? Why are you putting this guy on WNPR? What's your answer to that? What is it about you that's important for people to hear, people maybe in a public radio audience to hear?
Well, I think your typical audience is probably likely to sympathize, where they're conservative at all, with a more establishment Republican vibe. I obviously don't represent that. I represent a much younger, more mischievous, trolly, if you like, youth element of the conservative movement. What's important, because there are so many of us, it's important because we altered the trajectory of the last election. And I'm important because I'm the person that they look up to most after perhaps the president. And one thing I do say in interviews regularly, particularly in environments like this, is yes, I'm a provocateur. And yes, I say some outrageous and terrible and rude and mean things to people. Well, let me be clear. I don't want everybody to be like me. But it's important, I think, that there are some people like me. Because I think there's a consensus among conservatives and libertarians of all bents, and even now among some liberals, some progressives, that the boundaries of acceptable speech in American public life have become too narrow. I think there's finally an understanding, finally a consensus that conservatives, for instance, have a really rough time on college campuses. And there's beginning to become an acceptance that conservatives don't really get a fair shake in the press either. And I think there's now incontrovertible evidence because of the last election that conservatives are not understood by the media. The media is incapable of reporting accurately and thoroughly and fairly on a huge swathes of the country that it simply doesn't understand, and it wasn't able to predict how they would behave in the last election as a result. I represent the younger end of American conservatism, which is utterly sick of hand-wringing, school-marmish political correctness, of people telling us, what jokes we're allowed to tell, what's sexist, what's racist, what's homophobic. The implication being that somehow somebody in a newsroom or on a desk or in a studio somewhere on the coasts knows what's in the hearts of millions of Americans and is able to sort of loftily condemn perfectly innocent things. I represent a young libertarian audience that has nothing to watch on TV. Imagine if you're young and you're slightly left wing, you might watch, pretty much every channel. Any one of the late night shows. All the way
You
up.
can't find anything in Game of Thrones to make you happy?
Yes, of course, but for those 40 or maybe 50% of the population who feel as though they might lean rightwards, what current affairs shows are there for them out there? I mean, you've got Fox News, the average age of the viewer is 70 plus. There's simply nothing for 3 generations below that. If you are of a conservative bent, and if you're of a very conservative bent, there's nothing anywhere. Now, with the possible exception of Breitbart.
Wouldn't market forces just correct that? In other words, if there's this tremendous appetite in those generations that you're talking about for a certain kind of political speech, I mean, there's a lot of channels in the spectrum right now. Why wouldn't there just be that?
Well, the market.
What's getting in the way of that?
No, the market is correcting it, and it's correcting it in the form of me. And that's why, to answer your first question, it's important that the rest of America who thinks they don't like me understand what they're actually talking about. Most people who object to Milo, who don't like me, are people who only know me from headlines and have never actually come to one of my shows. They've never read a column by me. They've never visited my YouTube channel. They've never read a proper in-depth interview where I've granted somebody access rather than just a comment piece about what an awful bigot I am. They actually have no idea what I believe. They have no idea what I stand for. When I say things like, for instance, reparations. I'm quite persuadable on the subject of reparations for slavery. I just wish that it would go, to black schools. Their jaws drop because they had no idea that that I'm this sort of more complex and iconoclastic figure than they were led to believe, because they've been lied to by the journalists they trust. So,
is that the reason, or have you done a lot of things that call attention to themselves and obscure? For example, that's a really interesting observation, and you're absolutely right. I would not have associated you with that idea that reparations.
But I've said it in so many interviews.
To...
People never do their research. People never read. People have no idea. All you have to do is watch 5 minutes of me on television or in one of my college talks, and there are hundreds of hours of me on YouTube, to immediately identify that this is not the person the media is describing. I am not Richard Spencer. I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not a bigot, sexist, racist. I'm not any of those things. I am a funny, quirky, interesting, provocative lecturer, author, and journalist. And it just takes 5 minutes of the most cursory research to realize that there's something more interesting happening here, which clearly you and your producers have done because you've invited me on, but most people simply don't. And the slightest bit of research would
But don't you bear some responsibility for that problem? I mean, you described yourself at the outset as trolly. Trolly, to me anyway, means a person who is intentionally causing trouble in a way that's not meant to be productive or to further a conversation, but simply just to get people's dander up. And you've done a lot of that. I mean, aren't you responsible for some of the quote unquote misconceptions about you?
Well, as you'll know by now from reading my book, I like to describe myself as a sort of virtuous troll, or a troll for Jesus. Again, that is in itself another troll. But I think that there's a difference between trolling and simply outright meanness and unkindness and bad behavior with no purpose. I like to describe trolls, as they are on the internet today, as the only people who are left telling the truth. Trolls, for me, at least when done properly, done virtuously, done righteously, as I like to think I do it, are the people who can say the uncomfortable truths, the unsayable things that we all know are true but we can't say in public. And it's those Falstaffian figures, it's the jesters, it's the trolls, it's people like me and the people who read my book, in their hundreds of thousands, I'm happy to say, who say things that the rest of America can't for fear of social censure or professional disaster. And yes, I mean, I would be whining about all of this if I thought of myself as a victim, but I don't. I say provocative and outrageous things to get precisely the reaction I do get, in order to demonstrate that the American media is really in the business of virtue signaling and policing language, and isn't really interested in the truth, isn't really interested in what's actually happening, just wants to spend all of its time deciding who's racist and deciding who's sexist. So I very often do dumb myself down in some of my public proclamations and in some of my interview answers, because I want to see who bothers to dig deeper. I want to see who bothers to actually find out the truth. And the answer, I'm sorry to say, in many cases in the mainstream media, certainly in this country, is almost nobody. You know who does look in? My fans, the people who read me, the people who've bought my book, the people who come to my shows. They understand and appreciate there's something far more intelligent and complex and interesting going on in my career. It's journalists whose primary job isn't to speak truth to power or explain what's going on in the country, but rather simply to point at things and yell bigot. Those people don't understand me because they have no interest in doing so. All they want is to call me nasty names as a way of demonstrating their own virtue. Well, that, I think, is a devastating indictment and a completely true picture, I'm sorry to say, again, of the state of the American media. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. Since the election, American journalists on all of the major broadcast networks and in all of the newspapers are doubling down on the strategy that didn't work for them the last time, doubling down on the stuff that put Donald Trump in the White House. Many of your listeners will be deeply uncomfortable with the current president, but they should be aware that the newspapers they listen to and the TV stations that they watch are in large part responsible for him being there. And second of all, you should be glad that you only got Trump. You should be very relieved that Donald Trump is the worst that happened to this country, because for 30 years, the left has been wrongly and hurtfully calling people racists, calling people sexists, calling people homophobes, calling people bigots, on the basis of almost no evidence. It has become the primary function and purpose and modus operandi of the American media establishment, is to simply point at things and say sexist, point at things and say racist. That is all your newspapers do.
I have to object to that. I mean, first of all, I work in the American media establishment. I don't spend my days doing that. It would be a very unusual thing for me to do that over the course of, 50 weeks of work in a given year. I'd be astonished if I did that more than once or twice, if that at all. And I think that's true of an awful lot of journalists. I think that's a ridiculously blanket statement to say the primary purpose of the American media is to call people racist and sexist.
Look at what young people are reading, because I'm not talking to 65 and 75-year-olds, although many of them like me too. I'm talking to 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. Do you read BuzzFeed? Do you read Vox? Do you read Mike? Did you read Gawker when it was still alive? Because I think if you were reading the things that young people read, if you were reading Complex, these kind of outlets that publish via Snapchat, for instance, I think you'd have a different view. So it might be possible that I should temper what I just said with a caveat that maybe that's not true for the things that the over 50s or the over 60s listen to. Maybe, Fox and NPR don't do that. But look at the media outlets whose coverage is directed at millennials. And yes, that's exactly what they spend all day doing. That is precisely their primary purpose. It is to police other people's sex lives, to police other people's attitude, to police other people's language. These bitter, miserable, middle-aged bloggers who live in Los Angeles and New York, lecturing the rest of us on how we should live, telling us what's okay and what's not okay, coming up with these bizarre new definitions of racism that say that white people are always racist all the time, even if they don't know it, even if they don't mean to be, even if they're not really, but we'll just say it. And black people can't be racist because of structural disadvantage, all this kind of nonsense dreamed up on college campuses, complete malarkey. But that is the primary business in which the media is engaged. For anybody under 40 who reads anything directed at them, go online, look at also consider this. It isn't just what you say when you're on the air. It's not just what you publish in the pages of the newspaper. I believe the primary impression that the American public gets about journalists isn't from their printed work. It's from what they say on Twitter, when they're being a little looser with their language because they think everybody agrees with them. They don't have to get it through an editor. They don't have to worry about so much about defamation. And they can simply just express what they really believe. And you'll see Guardian journalists, you'll see Hollywood scriptwriters, you'll see professors saying all manner of appalling things that they might not at work when their guard is down and they're chatting to people online. And you'll see, for instance, a Guardian journalist saying things like, "Kill all white men, masculinity is so fragile, I bathe in male tears." This sort of nasty, mean, vindictive, ugly ideology of social justice that has emerged from American college campuses. And this is, they spend all day calling people names. And this,
You realize that Milo Yiannopoulos complaining about other people being nasty, vindictive.
But I'm not a hypocrite
vicious,
because I'm not. No, but I'm not a hypocrite. I say I do it, and I explain to you why I'm doing it. They think they're virtuous. I'm perfectly happy to admit that I'm, down there with the pig getting dirty. And I'll also even explain to you my reasoning for doing it. I'll tell you why I'm doing it. But the hypocrisy for me isn't me complaining about name calling. I'm just pointing out that you guys do it too, and they do it. Let's say they do it, and they're hypocrites for doing it. And by the way, they're wrong about everything. But I don't. I'm not pretending to be a feminist, champion of women's rights, a champion of racial justice. I'm a free speech activist and a provocateur and a journalist and an author and an entertainer. And I'm drawing attention to what I see as hypocrisies out there in the world. I am not claiming to lead some kind of social justice movement. Quite the opposite. I want to destroy it because I think it's gone off the rails. So yeah, of course, I call people names too.
I'm looking at Vox.com. So Vox is one of the sites you mentioned. I'm looking at them right now. I'm looking at their front page. I just don't see any of the stuff that you're talking about. I don't see them policing people's language, their sex lives, their racial attitudes. I see a lot of explanatory journalism for the most part.
We obviously see we see very different things because Vox gave up on its mission of neutral explanatory journalism a very, very long time ago. And anyone who is in the slightest bit invested in any of the subjects Vox writes about will tell you, and even left-wingers will admit it, that they have from their original pretense of explaining the world neutrally and factually have lurched to the left, and even their own journalists say so. And these days, what that means is,
but that's a different thing. That's a different thing from what your initial claim was. All they do is police people's sexual attitudes, their racial attitudes.
They do it to everyone. Look at the names they call.
But now you're saying that their coverage on substance is to the left. That's something that I could very easily agree with. The first thing is very different. You're equating two things.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, and I think that in large part the project.
They're not mutually exclusive, but they're not the same either.
No, they're not the same, but they're both true. And in large part, the purpose of the political left has become this identity politics-driven social engineering. Think about what's happened to the political left in the West, right? Whether it's the Labour Party in England or the Democrat Party here, they've given up on their old constituencies, and they've given up on being primarily economic arguers. They don't really care too much about, for instance, the white working class. In fact, the Democrat Party is clearly actively hostile to the white working class. And instead, they've created this new coalition. And I talk about this in the book too, in the first chapter. Instead, they've created this new coalition of women, minorities, immigrants, and everyone else who thinks they've been given a raw shake in life, or anyone who could be persuaded that they might have done. And as a result, they have this sort of vested interest, not only electorally if they work in politics, but culturally, socially, theoretically if they're working in media or in the academy, of talking about this stuff all the time. And I don't think you can plausibly claim that millennial media isn't obsessed with identity. I mean, just look at BuzzFeed. I mean, you chose Vox, fine. They masquerade as an explainer site, and everybody knows better. You have to spend 2 minutes on there, and you can see what they're up to. But go to BuzzFeed. White people this, black people that, women that, men that, and it is ugly, divisive, hateful stuff. And by the way, the targets are always the same: the poor, straight, white male. Well, it might have been the case. So what's going on here, of course, is that they are correctly crediting straight white men for, doing all the good stuff in history, and then deciding that they're going to be eternal villains and going for them in a way that would not be acceptable about any other group. And I am not here to defend straight people, white people, or men. All I try to do in my talks is to draw attention to the hypocrisy of people who claim to advocate for social justice and equality and diversity and kindness, whilst at the same time speaking about a number of groups in this country in terms that simply would not be acceptable if it were about anyone else. And I really don't, that you can plausibly claim that these millennial news sites, and even also the New York Times, is guilty of this too. The Washington Post is guilty of this too. And I think it is a red thread running through all of American media, all of American journalism. I think it's poisonous. CNN is terrible for this. MSNBC racked through with identity politics. I don't think you can plausibly claim that it isn't a major preoccupation, if not the major preoccupation, of the American media establishment. And secondly, I think the argument is very persuasive that this has been ultimately a force for evil and not a force for good. It has been divisive. It has led these journalists down a road where they can't even see what the real world looks like anymore, leading them into the terrible predictions they made at the last election, and fostering hatred and legitimizing and encouraging movements like Black Lives Matter, which accomplish absolutely nothing except for the destruction of black neighborhoods and all-around misery.
So how is your book not obsessed with identity? It seems to me you've written an entire book that's also obsessed with identity. Well,
of course it is, because I'm commenting on the identity politics industry. My purpose is to knock out.
But you're also commenting on your own identity. I mean, this book is very much a profession of who you are and an explanation of who you are. Right? It's a book about your identity.
No, of course, but here's what I had in mind for this book, and here is why I think that I'm so effective. And it's that just by living and breathing, I offer up a refutation of the two things that keep the left in cultural power. And one of them is political correctness. And I demonstrate through just living that you don't have to be scared of what you say. And you can be outrageous and be provocative and not necessarily have your life destroyed. Or at least that, nothing bad happens if you turn around to the skulls.
Didn't you, by your own contention, you lost 3 jobs in an eye blink because of what you said? I mean, isn't your life?
No, well, I mean, I had a hiccup in my career because I said something I didn't intend. Something tumbled out of my mouth I didn't mean, and I apologized for that. But what I'm talking about is people expressing their sincere opinions, or talking about data or studies or whatever, stepping outside the bounds of political correctness. What I accidentally said in that late night live stream wasn't me stepping outside the bounds of political correctness. It was something tumbling out of my mouth that I did not mean and did not intend. So I think that's a different case. But the first thing is living and breathing anti-political correctness. And the second is my whole career is an experiment in identity politics and dedicated to the destruction of them by revealing them as ridiculous. Because what I do is I go out and say, look, I am a gay Jew immigrant who exclusively sleeps with African American men, and I'm really, really right-wing. And I'm, all of these things are true. All of these things are me. But what I'm doing by making it very public and constantly banging on about it, writing about it and speaking about it is showing gay people that they don't have to automatically vote Democrat just because they like the company of other men. I'm showing, I'm trying to demonstrate through my life, using myself as an example, how ridiculous and counterfactual and anti-intellectual identity politics are. The idea that because you have a particular skin color or sexuality or a particular aspect of yourself about which you can do nothing, that you should vote in a particular direction and believe a particular set of ideas. I find that to be utterly ridiculous. And it's something that...
But that's not the newest. I mean, there have been log cabin Republicans for a long time, right? So, I mean, the notion... Isn't it more...
Yes, but they haven't been effective, and I am.
Right.
They haven't done anything.
How are you effective?
Well, I think that the numbers speak for themselves. The number of followers and fans and enthusiasts I have speak for themselves. I have reached. I'm the gay conservative that reaches parts that others can't. I think because I'm more entertaining, because I'm funnier, because I'm better looking, I'm more popular and successful, and I just have a colossal audience compared to anyone who's done what I'm doing now. They just haven't been as good at it, I don't know why black conservative. There hasn't been I don't know why there's not a black Milo. I don't know why there's not a really funny, waspish, fantastically effective, brilliantly entertaining black conservative as a role model for the black community, saying, look, you don't have to just vote for these people who've done nothing for you. I don't know why that hasn't happened. I don't know why the gay Milo didn't happen before me. Sometimes America needs rescuing, and sometimes you need Europeans to come over here and tell you more about yourselves than you realize, whether it's Alexis de Tocqueville or Christopher Hitchens or me. And I'm just so much better at it than anyone who came before me. And it's, again, another answer to the first question you asked me. And the log cabin Republican types, I'm sure they're all perfectly nice people, but they've just never done anything. And they suffer from the disease that most conservatives in this country have, which is they think that writing essays about something is the same as doing something. Why am I successful? Because I get out of bed, I get off my ass, I raise money, I go have a college tour, I write books, and I get out there and I park my pink glittering tanks right on the lawn of the enemy. I get invited by college Republicans to go speak. So I go speak to UC Berkeley, and it is pandemonium. But what happens as a result of that pandemonium is a serious introspection on the part of America's cultural elites about the state of college campuses. You might think I'm clownish. You might even think I'm cruel. You might think I'm unfunny. You might find the whole Milo thing mystifying. But what is the result of Milo been? What is the effect? A national conversation about UC Berkeley and whether college campuses have become too hostile to conservatives. And what happened in the wake of Milo? Fareed Zakaria at Bucknell the commencement address this year. He basically laid waste to the faculty, saying that conservatives were an endangered species on campus, and lectured the professors at Bucknell about including more intellectual diversity on campus. That is a direct result of my influence.
What you're describing to me strikes me as a very, very old debate that's been going on at least since the time of William F. Buckley. And
yes, and conservatives have been losing it until me.
Well, I think
it's a very old debate that
they're
conservatives
suddenly winning because of you.
Well, no, look, it's a very old debate
that
it's a very old debate that conservatives have been having for a long time and been losing for a long time. Now they're not losing. Now we have UC Berkeley as a fiery demonstration, an unavoidable proof of what conservatives have been whinging about, let's be honest, for 30 years in the pages of Commentary magazine and National Review and doing nothing to fix. Conservatives
My guess is Berkeley is going to be exactly the same place as it was 2 years ago, 2 years from now. I'd be astonished if you have any lasting effect
listen, I
on
don't
the
aspire
ethos of UC Berkeley.
Well, I'm going to hold a free speech week there this year in September. We're going to spend $500,000 having a massive. We're going to make it the epicenter of free speech in this country. So I don't know. I mean, watch and see. And I'll come back on in 6 months and you tell me whether you're impressed or not. But certainly, I'm not aspiring to change the fabric, the culture of UC Berkeley, of all places, overnight. But the discussion that is prompted by what I do, by UC Davis, UW Seattle, UC Berkeley, all of the campuses that were electrified and in some cases set fire to, merely because a guy wanted to show up and say a gay guy didn't like Black Lives Matter very much, didn't like feminism very much, and wanted to crack a few jokes. Let's be completely clear about what we're saying. This is a guy whose opinions are perfectly within the respectable, reasonable, conservative mainstream. I, Milo, do not believe anything weird or wacky or hateful. I believe things that you could see on Fox, that you could read in National Review. I just express myself in a much more effective, much more persuasive, and much more charismatic way. And for that reason, I'm effective, and that's why they hate me so much, and that's why they smash the place up when I show up.
Some of the ways that you say things are or beyond the bounds of what would be ordinary political or social discourse.
Who cares? George
well,
will.
People
Nobody's
do
ever.
Care. You got banned from Twitter because people did care, right?
Yes, but what I'm saying, but it's another tremendous victory because the people who actually followed me, the people who actually pay attention to me, were outraged, and that single thing, me getting banned from Twitter, was the moment you knew the social network was doomed. It was the moment the company was finished because it demonstrated that they would. I mean, first of all, they took my checkmark away in this sort of petty act of vandalism, just to sort of, like give me a slap on the wrist or whatever, a mechanism that is supposed to protect the identity of public figures. And at that time, I don't think there was anybody more impersonated on the internet than me, except maybe Beyonce. And they took it away just to be petty, to be pathetic, and then waited until they could use something that would satisfy their own side, and they thought they could sort of slide out a ban under the cover of, I don't know, it was just a remarkable, bizarre episode in which, that company was feeding false information to journalists, pretending that I had made racially charged comments that I did not make, pretending, that I had said things to Leslie Jones that I did not say. And to this day, not one single media outlet has corrected falsehoods, despite me writing to them extensively, about what went down around the Leslie Jones thing. They all lied about it, and they, in some cases, did so knowingly, which is again another part of what I talk about all the time, which is the purposeful, deliberate mendacity of the left wing press in this country. When you declare politics to the right of Jane Fonda, you become a public enemy, and you become fair game. And I've just decided that I'm going to be completely outrageous. I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to say whatever I want about whoever I want. I'm going to be spiteful and bitchy and mean, and I'm going to try to be as funny as I can through the whole thing. And I'm going to do one thing in addition to all of that, which is always tell the truth.
So here you have the floor. What did you say about Leslie Jones? What didn't you say about Leslie Jones?
So most of the reports say, first of all, that I led a harassment campaign against Leslie Jones. Utterly false. What I did was publish a review of the Ghostbusters movie on Breitbart. And the review was very withering about the movie, but I actually defended Leslie Jones in the review. I said that I found it a shame that she was expected to play this minstrel-like character, this stereotypical sassy black woman character. And I said in the review, which again surprises people because they've never read it, I said in the review, it would be nice if we get to a stage in movies, in cinema, where somebody could just happen to be black and don't have to play a tired black stereotype. And I said, if I were a social justice warrior, I might be quite offended by the sort of tired, low-rent stereotypes that she's perpetuating on screen. Fortunately, I'm not. But I will just say it would be nice if we got to that stage. People are stunned when I tell them that because they've never read the review. Then on Twitter, I made a few jokes at her expense. I said she looked like, she looked like a dude, and she does. I said that she was, her tweets were barely literate. They are. Go read them for yourself. She can barely use the English language. I'm entitled to say that about a celebrity. You might not find it particularly worthwhile or highbrow or interesting commentary, but I'm entitled to do that, and if you don't want to read it, tune out. If you do want to read it, come to my shows. For Twitter to feed to journalists, for journalists to credulously and willingly write up that A, I staged a harassment campaign, and B, then you go to the more disreputable outlets like Vox and BuzzFeed, who will just simply print, knowing that it isn't true, that I tweeted racist memes or that I said racist things to Leslie Jones. Absolutely categorically untrue, and they've never been able to provide a single tweet or piece of evidence because it didn't happen. That's the kind of stuff that makes people vote Trump, frankly. That's the kind of stuff that makes people really angry.
Let me just offer a contrast here. So not unreasonably, you say, look, you would just like to be held accountable for things that you actually said or tweeted, not accountable
come
for
to me for the things I actually do, because there are enough of them. You don't have to invent things.
Right. So accountable for those things, but not accountable for things that people do in your name or things that people do because they think you might have started some kind of fire or gotten some kind of
No, I mean, look, Justin Bieber tweets about Selena Gomez and she gets 50,000 death threats. Do we hold him responsible? And he does so knowing that that they've just broken up in a very public way, and that his fans are going to tweet death and rape threats against her. He does so knowingly. It's far closer to incitement than anything I've ever done. Same thing with Beyonce and Taylor Swift. And by the way, Leslie Jones specifically violated the piece of Twitter policy that they say I violated, which I didn't, which is incitement, with words like "get her" with 4 exclamation marks under it. She specifically and deliberately put her followers on certain tweeters that hurt her feelings. She actually did blatantly, flagrantly, categorically violate the policies that Twitter said wrongly that I violated. And what does this tell you? It tells you that Twitter cares more about identity politics than reality. Because she's left-wing and she's black and she's a woman, she can do no wrong. That is counterfactual. It's ludicrous. Most Americans hate it, and that is why Trump is in the White House.
Would a person who's associated with Black Lives Matter be fair in saying, you know what, Milo kind of does the same thing to us? In other words, we started this movement. It was really about shootings of black citizens by police, about traffic stops, about stuff like that. But because of the other things that other people do, not us, and not traceable to any specific thing that we've said, he denounces us. He says we're turning into a terrorist organization. He associates us with all kinds of things that other people do, possibly feeling that they're inspired by what we do, but certainly not with our blessing. I mean, you want the same thing, right? You only want to be held accountable for what you do and say.
Yeah, but I'm holding them accountable for specific lies they tell people. Like I hold the media account. I did not tell anyone to do anything to Leslie Jones. I cracked a few jokes and wrote a disobliging review. And then some people on the internet posted horrible, ugly, disgusting things about her, which in every interview I've ever been asked about, I have said I find absolutely horrible, right, and distasteful, and I wish people wouldn't do it, okay? But it's not my job to police the rest of the world, and I'm not going to get involved in that, because then I just, have my own set of what's okay and what's not okay. I think everything's okay, and people, that means that there are consequences for free speech. What you have to be held accountable for what you say, but you only have to be accountable for what you say. And Black Lives Matter tells lies to people and gins them up and winds them. I mean, there's no other movement in the country that is consistently followed by violence and bloodshed. Well, why is this happening? They're not just like innocent Presbyterians wandering around saying Jesus was cool. They are ginning people up, telling people lies. What I say about Black Lives Matter. Well, what I say about Black Lives Matter in the book, to be specific, is that if they really cared about Black lives, they would focus on other things. They were, if you're a black activist, right? You are. What I say two things actually. One is that they're totally ineffective and actually just counterproductive, because all that has come from Black Lives Matter is black neighborhoods in flames and nothing else, and a bit more racial division and hatred and hostility, right? And second of all, that their priorities are wrong. Okay, that's what I say in the book. Their priorities are wrong. If they actually cared about black lives, if you're a black activist, you've got money, you're getting some money from George Soros, whatever you're doing, and your priority is to stop black people being killed. You don't go for the police. The police are like the number one thing saving black lives in this country. They're the ones, and where the police withdraw as a result, in the Ferguson effect, more black people get killed. If you really believed that you wanted to save black lives, if your priority was really fewer dead black bodies, you'd do two things. One of them is that you would advocate for the defunding of Planned Parenthood. And the second is that you would support the police. And instead, Black Lives Matter gins up hatred and violence toward the police, and then steps back and pleads innocence afterwards. And this is my observation.
I can subject a lot of things to that kind of critique. I mean, for example, if Donald Trump wanted to save American lives, save the most possible American lives, going after homegrown domestic terrorism or even terrorism brought in by people who have refugee or immigrant status, that's not a particularly effective way to save American lives. That's not how people die in America.
No, but
Since
I don't
9/11,
think
there's been a tiny number.
But the stated purpose of Black Lives Matter is to save black lives. The clue's in the name. Donald Trump doesn't say that his stated purpose is to save American lives. What Donald Trump says in his speeches, as he just did in Poland, is that he wants to save Western civilization, and to do that, and that is a conversation about values, a conversation about who we have and who we don't have in our countries. And for me, as a gay man, and I was there at Pulse nightclub in Orlando just afterwards. I've come from London, which is a complete horror story. As a gay man, I am very comfortable with the so-called Muslim ban. I am very comfortable with, a suspicion of people coming from Middle Eastern cultures that want to murder me and oppress my mom and my female friends. Very comfortable with that. Donald Trump's stated purpose, as we now know in that fantastic speech in Poland, is to save Western civilization. Well, if he wants to save Western civilization, what's the number one threat to it? Islam. So for me, he's doing a good job. Black Lives Matter, as they kind of advertise in the name, want to save black lives. Well, if they really believe that, they should be supporting the police, not inciting murder, not inciting not standing by innocently claiming to just be an anti-racism organization and to be fighting structural, racism and all blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, ginning people up to kill police officers.
But you're not really suggesting that Donald Trump has never invoked the issues of safety and safeguarding American lives as justification for some of his anti-Muslim policies, for some of his anti-Muslim rhetoric.
I don't believe that
would be an insane thing for you to say.
I don't believe that he has anti-Muslim
the fact that he said something in
policies,
Warsaw the other day doesn't mean...
Well, I don't think he has anti-Muslim policies. I think he has anti-terrorism policies. It just happens to be, I'm sorry to tell you, that all the terrorist countries are Muslim. But I don't think that's fair. But there's also no reason why he can't have multiple explanations for doing the same good thing, and
he certainly does.
Well, fine, and maybe they're all good reasons. You'd have to talk to him about that. You can interview him, but from my point of view, I'm very relaxed about the reasons he offers. I think they're all perfectly persuasive enough. And as I say to you, this won't be popular with all of your listeners. It won't even be popular with all of your producers. We're about to get hauled out of here for hate speech or something. As a gay man, I am totally relaxed with a permanent ban on more Muslims coming into the West. And people will find that extreme. People will find that outrageous. It's probably going to be the subject of my next book. But Donald Trump's stated purpose is the safety and continued flourishing and success and security and beauty of Western civilization. I think that's wonderful. And I think that he's entirely right to identify Islamist terrorism as the primary threat to that.
Although, wouldn't it make sense as a gay man to try to figure out first what's the biggest danger to gay men in America and try to address that?
Of course, and that's the other reason I'm so mad with the gay establishment, because they don't talk about HIV and AIDS anymore. They're obsessed with transgender pronouns instead. Part of the reason being that all these organizations are now run by lesbians who don't care about HIV and AIDS because they don't themselves catch it. Stonewall in the UK, the most ancient gay charity, is now run by a lesbian and talks about barely anything except transgender pronouns. The Terence Higgins Trust, literally an HIV charity, now talks about transgender pronouns. Who cares? Who cares? There were 40,000 new HIV infections in, I think, 2015. And they don't they don't want to talk about that anymore because it's not as
sexy.
To
use your logic about Trump, why can't they talk about both? Why can't they be concerned about AIDS and transgender rights?
Of course they can, but it would be nice if we got the sense that they had some reasonable priorities, and I don't think they do. And the nail in the coffin for me was Orlando, a Pulse nightclub, when every liberal, let's not tar all liberals with the brush, but every progressive, every social justice warrior, every Hollywood celebrity who pronounced on the subject, every politician, every gay charity was sort of racing to Twitter to say, don't let this stoke up Islamophobia, and love wins. Well, love doesn't win. AK-47s win, and AK-47s in the hands of murderous Muslim maniacs who were brainwashed and radicalized here in America is the thing that you need to watch out for. And it's like the whole left-wing establishment is like desperate for you not to look behind the curtain and not to say these things. I mean, it's look, I posted on Facebook about the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, where another one of these Islamic lunatics blew up a bunch of young women and gays who were there to listen to Ariana Grande and watch her shaking her tush and listen to terrible music. I mean. Fine, they should be able to do what they want, despite their bad taste, without threats, without the worry that they're going to get blown up. And I said on Facebook, Ariana Grande should name the enemy. Imagine how powerful it would have been if a star of her magnitude had said something about not Islam, not Muslims, but about radical Islam. Imagine if she said this ideology is dangerous and it is against the values we all believe in, like love and freedom and tolerance and respect. Don't get sucked into this. And maybe she could have avoided 10,000 people joining ISIS? Who even knows what the effects of that would have been? It would have been really brave for her, but instead she fell back on this asinine, sort of rictus grin, anodyne, funless oh, love wins, I'm so gutted, let's all just love each other and stop the hate. What does that even mean? No, let's stop radical Islam. And the left doesn't want to talk about this. Facebook made me take those posts down. And there was nothing remotely rude or cruel or offensive about anything, but I had disagreed with their two favorite groups, which is pop stars and Muslims. So, they made me take the posts down. You can't. This is what conservatives are so upset about. You can't express yourself on Facebook or Twitter without getting banned or censured in some way. You don't see your opinions reflected or your concerns reflected in the media. When you express yourself, you're called a hateful bigot, sexist, racist, homophobe, whatever. You've been sort of systematically silenced by Hollywood, by the media, and by academia. And it's very clear. I don't think you can make the argument that that's not true anymore. 20 years ago, when conservatives said that, perhaps they were being ridiculous, but they're not anymore. And that's why people like me so much. And that's why people put Donald Trump in the White House.
Before we run out of time, your new book, Dangerous, I know you're now in litigation with Simon & Schuster. Tell us about that. What happened with your book? Your book's out now, and
it is and doing
pretty well.
Phenomenally well. Yeah, it's really great. We're very happy. So it's misreported in the media as self-published. Of course, they say that as in a sort of demeaning way to try to suggest that you're just, you've got this sort of nasty, cheap, on-demand paperback coming out. Well, no, I've actually invested $3 million in starting my own imprint, Dangerous Books, and we're going to publish a lot of people besides just me. So the first book from Dangerous is my book, Dangerous, and it's selling phenomenally well. What I did do is Simon & Schuster, I got cancelled from CPAC over the comments that you mentioned earlier on, where I sort of stumbled into saying something I didn't mean about. I was talking about how gay men grow up and sometimes find older role models, and there's sometimes a sexual component to that. And something tumbled out of my mouth that I didn't quite intend. So I apologize for that and took my licks, as it were, right? But Simon & Schuster seem to have used that as an opportunity to break the contract I had with them pretextually. They 24 hours before they dumped my book, they were saying how good the manuscript was, how much they liked it. They were grateful for all the hard work I did. They were looking forward to marketing it. "You done good" was the text I got from the editor, and then 24 hours later, we got a letter from them saying that the manuscript was suddenly, abruptly unfit for publication. Well, I think what actually happened was they caved to pressure from the left and used the opportunity of a little slip up from me to cancel my book deal. But the thing is, the only thing I had lost prior to that was a speaking gig at CPAC, which is a very obscure little political conference for like 23-year-old dorks in bow ties who'd invited me to inject a bit of star power into proceedings and then retracted that, because whatever they like to say, they do still have a bit of a problem with gays, and me talking loosely in a way that I perhaps shouldn't have about relationships between gay men of very different ages was too much for their evangelical board to bear. And they said, no, we're not having Milo. That didn't do me any harm. But Simon & Schuster canceling my book, using it as an excuse to break the contract pretextually.
Simon & Schuster publishes Rush Limbaugh. I mean, they're not afraid of publishing conservative voices.
No, that's not where they had no idea what was going to come down on them when they announced my deal. No Simon & Schuster author has had remotely close to the response from the left that I did. Not the same level of boycotts, not even close, not by an order of magnitude, not even close. I am by far the most because I'm by far the most controversial.
I think your problems are self-created. I think you cause all this trouble, and then you get upset that it causes you trouble.
You describe them as problems. I don't think they're problems at all. What I will do, however, is make sure that Simon & Schuster understands that they should not sign deals with conservatives and libertarians unless they're prepared to see through on their obligations, and they backed out of the deal pretextually, and they have to pay for that because that had knock-on effects. What happened when I lost my book deal was there was a sort of implication then that I was somehow unfit to be published by one of the big five publishers, which is clearly untrue from reading the book. Read the book and you will see that it is clearly untrue. 100,000 people have bought the book already, and I don't even have the latest numbers. I haven't had the latest numbers for a while because we can't print them fast enough. Clearly untrue. You think hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to sign? I'm not Richard Spencer. If Richard Spencer released a book, he'd sell about 4,000 copies, and it would top out because that's how many white nationalists there are in the world. But my book is selling, comfortably, easily, sailing into six figures. Right? It's very clear that they just didn't want the level of opprobrium and noise and drama and controversy that I attracted. And why do I attract that? Partly because of what I say, but mostly because I'm really effective and the left is scared of me. They are really, really worried, because if gay men can do it, maybe women will be next, and then maybe black people will be after that. And suddenly, the victimhood-driven identity politics coalition that the Democrat Party has put together over the last 30 years might suddenly come crashing down. And what will they have left then? Because they've given up on the white working class in America. They've given up on the working class in general, to be honest. They've never done anything for the black community, despite constantly pandering to them. What will happen then when they don't have gays or women or immigrants or Muslims or blacks or anyone else left? They've given up on the working class. The party will evaporate. So I am the most effective weapon for people who believe that identity politics is garbage and must end. And I'm the most effective weapon for people who believe that you should be able to say, do, and be whatever you want, which is, enshrined in that incredibly controversial thing we know as the First Amendment. I'm the best and most effective warrior for those two things, and that's why the left hates me so much. And that is why they came for Simon & Schuster. I'm the most controversial person ever to get a deal with Simon & Schuster. And that ultimately, I believe, is why Simon & Schuster crumbled. Well, they're not entitled to do that because they signed a deal with me. They should never have offered me a book deal in the first place if they weren't prepared for the heat that was going to come. And I warned them repeatedly. They didn't listen. They were arrogant, and that's okay. But they got to pay. They got to either stick to the deal or they got to pay up. Because what happened to me afterwards was, set back my plans. I want to be the right-wing Bill Maher one day. And what Simon & Schuster did could have put me back 3 years. That could have cost me tens of millions of dollars. So Simon & Schuster has to pay.
Oh, I wouldn't want to be the anything Bill Maher. Milo Yiannopoulos, it has been fun to visit with you. Thanks so much for taking the time. The book is dangerous.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for spending time with me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Thanks.
Was that okay?
That was good.
Terrific.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice to talk to you. Take care. Bye.
Yes.
I should do interviews on 2 hours of sleep more often.